Now, with this wave of change being brought forth by African Americans taking a stand and demanding action, this is going to bother a sector of our society that is afraid that their way of life is going to be different. You might have heard the phrase where people say people are afraid of change or something of that nature. People are afraid of change or I'm afraid of change. And I don't believe that to be true. I don't think people are afraid of change per se. I think what people are really afraid of is loss. Um, if you had $5 in your bank account and I changed it to $500, you probably wouldn't be afraid of that. You see, when change is positively affecting you, you might actually appreciate the change, embrace the change, support the change. So it's really not that people are afraid of change, people are afraid of loss. And for many white Americans, when they begin to see change benefiting or favoring the African American community, they, for some strange reason, want to tie along with that sense of equality that it must come with a degradation or reduction of white people's position or stance in our society. And that's actually a lot of projection going on. There's a lot of projecting going on there, implying that, well, these people are going to treat us bad. Well, why do you think they'll do that? Well, is it possible because you've treated them bad? That because you are so aware of uh, that human element, um, because of the way in which you've treated African Americans, you feel that that type of treatment could come your way if the shoe were on the other foot. There's a great deal of assumption being made there. However, there's reality behind a lot of this. When we move on to our next slide, the title of it says massive resistance. Well, massive resistance from who? From who? The African American population at best is teetering towards 14%, so they can't make up the masses. So let's talk about who exactly are the masses and what exactly are they resisting. It says here in 1955, the Supreme Court issued an implementation ruling calling for desegregation of all schools with all deliberate speed. Now, here's the issue. If you are familiar with the way in which our government operates, you will know that we have three branches of government, each tasked with a specific charge. So the executive branch, their job is to enforce the law. The legislative branch, they are to make the law. And the judicial branch, specifically the Supreme Court, they are to interpret or make judgments upon the law. The law that they all collectively respect should be the law of the land, which is the Constitution. Now, despite the fact that the Supreme Court has declared that all schools should be desegregated with all deliberate speed, well, what exactly is all deliberate speed? It's up to interpretation. Now, when it comes to educational matters, because they are not explicitly delegated or referenced in the Constitution, the 10th Amendment, also known as the States' Rights Amendment, uh, argues that educational decisions should be made at the state level. So the president, who happens to be Dwight D. Eisenhower at the time, may not make any public statements on the issue. He'll leave it up to the states, but here's our problem. What happens if at the state level the executive branch happens to be racist and they do not want to act sincerely with all deliberate speed? Well, then we have issues like Virginia, where they're going to close down schools but provide whites with funding to attend private schools. Now, this might echo or ring a bit familiar because in the state of Texas, we now have a program regarding school vouchers, which in essence is making the argument that all taxpayers are paying towards a public education. But what if you happen to not agree with what is being taught at the public or state level? Well, you're a tax-paying individual, you have children that are attending tax-supported schools, you will be given a certain amount, a voucher, so that you can attend a school that you find pleasing for whatever degree, to whatever degree. And ultimately, what we're getting at here is that it undermines, obviously, public education in pursuit of an education that revolves around, who knows what. But for Virginia, they're going to operate in the same vein, because the reality is that even though they want their kids attending schools, they just simply don't want their kids attending schools with black people. Some states are going to make it illegal for the NAACP to operate. Why? Because the NAACP is a viable organization that has brought attention to legal issues that negatively affect the African American community or other people of color. You have some states like Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina. They're going to fly the battle flag over their Capitol buildings. And when you see battle flag written or in quotation marks, that's the traditional, often misunderstood version of the Confederate flag. Now, if you're holding that flag, the Confederate flag, over your Capitol building, we can make an argument that that means two things. Well, it's the Confederate flag. Well, let's talk about it. The Confederate flag was representative of a collection of states that did not agree with where the country might be going, and that would be ultimately to abolish slavery. They saw that as a threat to their everyday way of life. Again, people are not afraid of change, they're afraid of loss. And that to fly that battle flag, okay, implying that they're ready for battle. Oh, are you? Well, I don't know if you recall from history, but the last time the Confederates got ready for battle, within a matter of 4 years, that whole, ship kind of was destroyed. So, I mean, like, where are we going with this notion of the Confederacy and this battle flag? Now, we can make an argument, no, it's for states' rights, and that's fine too. But let us remember, states' rights to do what? Enslave people or maintain the system of slavery? Or you can make an argument, well, the states' rights so where we can control education in our community. Okay, then that's fine too. However, that doesn't allow you or afford you the ability to discriminate against people based on the color of their skin. Now, at the time in 1955, there were no laws on the books that would protect you from that type of discrimination. So many states were operating and acting as if nothing really matters. Who cares what the Supreme Court says? As long as I live in the state and my governor, who is the leader of the executive branch at that state level, is not going to get on me about desegregating the schools, and I'm not going to desegregate. Mansfield ISD was the last public school system to integrate in the United States of America. So these type of issues are in our own backyards. You can see from these pictures here that the violence you see in the pictures, people being hit with high-powered water hoses from the Birmingham Fire Department, people getting hit with batons. You can see in the bottom left, people being dragged, Dr. King being arrested, and then you have life-size dummies hung in front of schools, specifically right here, Mansfield High School, as a way to detract the African American community from simply trying to get an education. Now, the executive branch at the state levels obviously are not respecting the Supreme Court decision. Therefore, it falls upon the leader of the executive branch at the national level to get the states on board or in line. So who exactly is that again? That's going to be Dwight D. Eisenhower. Now, by and large, Eisenhower remained aloof to the issue. He privately told many aides that he disagreed with the Supreme Court decision regarding Brown versus the Board of Education. He also believed that the states should be the ones to figure out how exactly to enforce the Brown versus the Board of Education decision. But he's being a bit negligent because he's giving those states an opportunity to get their house in order. And it's very apparent they have no desires to be sincere or genuine about getting that house in order. I mean, even when it came to the enforcements or the admittance of a young lady to the University of Alabama in 1956, Eisenhower was silent on the issue, quiet on the issue, and therefore it seems like Brown versus the Board of Education has no merit. Now, it won't be until 1957, 3 years after the Brown versus the Board of Education decision, that the governor of Arkansas is going to use the National Guard to prevent the integration of the Little Rock Central High School because 9 African American students wanted to attend that high school. Now, we have the governor, the leader of the executive branch, using the military to stop young people from trying to get an education and integrate a school. Eisenhower is going to be, upset about this. If you're not familiar, as we should be familiar, Eisenhower is a former military general. I mean, he served in World War II as the Supreme Allied Commander of the Armed Forces. Through his efforts, we were able to be successful in defeating fascism, in defeating Nazism, in defeating extreme nationalism, extreme racism, extreme expansionism. And to find out, he is now president of the United States, and we're struggling with this issue of racial supremacy, racial superiority. And what's even worse, as a general, he has people under his command that are not following orders. The orders are Brown versus the Board of Education. The governor of Arkansas is openly defying that decision, and on top of that, using the military, probably without permission. Now, granted, it's the National Guard is supposed to be at the discretion of the state, but still, there's some etiquette, especially in regards to the military. Referring to chain of command, you could have reached out to Eisenhower to kind of seek some type of guidance on the issue, but that didn't happen one bit. So what does Eisenhower do? Eisenhower sends in the military to ensure that those 9 students are going to be able to attend that high school, and this will be known as the Little Rock 9 incident. Let's go ahead and underline the Little Rock 9. Not that it's an incident, but it's a moment in this movement, the civil rights movement, where the federal government is finally, and when I say the federal government, I should state that the executive branch is finally taking action to ensure that the Supreme Court decision of Brown v. Board is upheld and is respected. So these events show that in the last minute, the federal government will respond to ensure safety. But that begs the question: the safety of who? Did they expect racial violence? Did they expect some type of animosity from the African American community? Because when you look at the demonstrations thus far, most of the aggression, most of the violence is coming from the white community, not from the African American community. It's not like they are rioting in the streets, at least not yet. But nonetheless, the Little Rock 9 or the episode of the Little Rock 9 represents the federal government taking action to ensure that Brown v. Board is respected throughout the United States of America. Now, please underline Sputnik. And I don't mean to deviate from the civil rights commentary. However, much of this lecture is going to operate chronologically. So we'll be delving into civil rights issues. However, we will also be dealing with other issues that will present themselves, specifically in chronological order. So, with that being said, in 1957, the Soviet Union will launch Sputnik, and this is a satellite that enters orbit. And this shocks America to think that there is this object that the American government is unfamiliar with. We don't know what it can do. We don't know where it's going. We don't know what it can potentially cause regarding damage, whether if it's for espionage. Um, I mean, we also need to be aware that the Soviet Union does have access to nuclear technology, nuclear weapons. So who knows what Sputnik was capable of, and that scared America. It scared America to the point where we had to up the ante ourselves. And if they put an object into space, we're going to put two objects into space. They're going to send an animal into space. We're going to send three animals into space. They put a man into space. And then we make the argument, man, we might need to put a man on the moon. Before we get to the concept of putting a man on the moon, Eisenhower gives a farewell address as he is finishing up his second term as President of the United States. And in that address, he urges Americans to be wary of its coming as it might endanger liberties or the democratic process. What he's getting at is we need to be wary of the military-industrial complex. That if we engage or develop an industry of military, that implies if we are funding the military, that's with designs to use said military. If we have an industry for military weapon development, that will imply we plan on using those weapons. And if that's the case, where America's major industry happens to revolve around military and military technology, that could lend itself to the notion that America could be involved in a multitude of wars that they don't need to simply to satisfy that industrial complex. There's so much money involved there. And Sputnik was the spark to ramping up our industrial complex regarding military technology and weaponry. Now it sounds like we're not only are we fighting communism on Earth, we're now fighting communism in an intergalactic sense, thanks to Sputnik. But again, the warning on behalf of Eisenhower is that we need to be mindful of whatever we build, because heaven forbid that what we build might ultimately destroy us. When Eisenhower leaves office, it's going to be in 1960. And in the election of 1960, we're going to have two candidates, or we have three, but two major candidates, one representing the Democratic Party by way of a young man whose name is John F. Kennedy. The Republicans will be represented by Eisenhower's vice president, who happened to be Richard Nixon. Nixon will lose this election, an incredibly close election. And this will usher in President John F. Kennedy at the start of the 1960s as we are moving a bit forward on this civil rights struggle. At this time, let's go ahead and underline the Greensboro sit-ins. The Greensboro sit-ins will take place in 1960. Again, we're going in chronological order, where 4 black college students sit in at a local diner until they are served. This demonstration sparks others around the United States to begin engaging in what are known as sit-ins. Now, sit-ins are these non-violent approaches to bringing about change. So these young college students are locked in, they're tuned in to the nonviolent direct action movement led by Dr. King and others. And they think to themselves, hey, we can bring about change just as much if we engage in this nonviolent action. So they go to a local diner. The name of the diner is Woolsworth, and they decide to sit at the counter, sit on a stool, and request service. They want to purchase some burgers. Well, the owner is like, "Hey, I don't, you know how it goes around here. We don't serve black people at the counter. Y'all are gonna have to come around back, and I'll make y'all the burgers there." And they said, "No, we want the burgers here. We have money, and we are paying customers. We feel like we deserve service." Ultimately, it boils down to that the owner's like, "Man, I'm not serving black people up in here. Y'all know how this goes. You know what? Forget it. I'm just gonna close the store." He closes the store. Now, be mindful. When he closes the store, that stops the owner from making money. So here's the economic element. These sit-ins are disrupting his place of business. Now, of course, he could call the police, and the police will make the argument like, "Hey, man, I don't know what your business model is, but when people want to give you money, it's probably a good thing to take it." And they're not being violent, and they're not loitering because they are desiring to be patrons. So legally, the police really have no grounds to enforce anything. Now, when he closes the store down, he thinks that it's over. Well, when he opens the store up the next day, here come those four college students, and they sit right back where they were, denying the store owner, again, access to income. Eventually, after 5 months, Woolsworth will ultimately come to a decision to desegregate their lunch counter, and this is a monumental moment for these young African Americans, because what they have demonstrated is that without direct influence, young people can bring about an exact change. So the significance of the Greensboro sit-ins is that now we have young people taking action under their own discretion, at their own direction, engaging in nonviolent direct action. Now, I don't want to be dismissive because there are important things to note here. Specifically, on the next slide, these young people understand they need some form of organization. So they are going to form an organization called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Let's go ahead and underline that, and I'll grab this right here. Now, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC, is actually formed by a local civil rights activist by the name of Ella Baker. Ella Baker has been constantly or consistently advocating on behalf of African Americans in her community. And through her leadership, she encourages young people to stand up for themselves, speak up for themselves, that they can't count on adults for change, that young people must be the agents of social and political change. And this is exciting. 200 young activists from Raleigh, North Carolina will form the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee as a way for ordinary people from across the United States to take action, to understand that they have brethren, they have brothers, they have sisters, regardless of race, that are being discriminated against, and they can collectively take action. And that's exactly what takes place here. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee will be just like the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, except instead of teaching only Christians and Southerners and leaders, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee will definitely reach out to younger audiences, regardless of race, regardless of income, regardless of religious affiliation, and let them know that they have a say. They have value in this movement. When you look at this picture here, you can see that there are women there, that there are white people there, standing and acting, or I should not standing. How about this? Sitting in unity with their fellow African Americans, or I should say, with fellow Americans in that regard. When you look at the sign up here, the SNCC symbol, you can see that they, with intent, there is a white hand and a black hand, with the notion that they want to promote that the civil rights movement is an American movement, and they implore the help of white Americans. They desire the help of white Americans. That this is something that they can collectively, as a community, take action to bring about change. Now, on this slide, obviously, based on the title, it says, "Don't write, just read." I'll go ahead and read it really quick. It says, in Birmingham, an FBI informant in the Klan learned of a detailed plan in which Police Chief Bull Connor had agreed to give the Klan 15 minutes after the bus arrived to beat the riders before local police would arrive. The plan was reported to the FBI headquarters, but no action was taken. The Trailway station was filled with Klansmen and reporters, including Howard K. Smith, when the Freedom Riders exited the bus. Now, the question is, what are the Freedom Riders? Well, this is a branch of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. It's a bunch of young college students that decide to protest by way of riding buses in an integrated fashion through segregated towns and cities to show and demonstrate that there's nothing wrong with integrating those buses. But when the Freedom Riders exited the bus while they were traveling down south, they're going to be beaten by a mob with baseball bats, iron pipes, and bicycle chains. And then, while they are battered and bleeding, they're going to be arrested. Arrested by who? By the Birmingham police. White Freedom Riders were particularly singled out for frenzied beatings. 2 riders were hospitalized, including white Freedom Rider Jim Peck, with 51 stitches in his head. Reverend Shuttlesworth in Birmingham was notified of the beatings by a fleeing reporter. This story is important because there's a lot we can unpack here. But by and large, what we know is that the FBI is well aware of racist activity, conspiracy, and the FBI makes the decision not to act. Why? Why do they not act? When they know crimes are about to be committed against, unarmed citizens or just citizens in general, but maybe it's because the color of their skin, they decided not to take action. And this is going to be a common theme that African Americans have to grapple with during this period of civil unrest. Now, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee will lead protests in Georgia with tactics of filling up the jails. This is another version of sit-ins, but instead of sitting in at a lunch counter, they decide to sit in jails. Now, what's the value behind that? Well, if you sit in at a jail, then real criminals won't have a place for them to stay at. So by filling up the jails, it puts a burden on the local police department, the local justice system, in order so that they are required to make changes regarding who they are arresting, whether or not if it's worth arresting this nonviolent protester in lieu of a violent criminal, simply because they are violating your social code down south of Jim Crow this and Jim Crow that. So young people are taking action. They're involved. They are putting a lot on the line. And when I say young people, again, not just African Americans. There are well-intentioned, good white male and females trying to help in any way possible to bring about this change. Now, in 1962, James Meredith will be admitted to the University of Mississippi, and that will cause a great deal of uproar, so much so that James Meredith says, hey, there's no big deal here. There's not a big problem here. Maybe we can peacefully march to bring attention to this issue, and hopefully white Americans won't get violent. What happens? Riots break out. 2 people are going to be killed. And because it can't seem to be under control, John F. Kennedy is going to have to send the army down to restore order. Now, in this picture, or on this slide, we have 2 pictures here. We have James Meredith up at the top, dressed well, probably filling out paperwork, applying for school. And in the bottom, you also have James Meredith being shot in the leg. Now, Students in my other classes, they were asking me, Mr. Sauce, I thought you said he was protesting. Was he protesting by himself? And I go, no, he wasn't protesting. He had a bunch of people out there protesting with him. But when you hear gunshots, people tend to scatter. And in that scattering, all that's left is an injured, wounded uh, James Meredith. And someone was able to take a photo of that exact moment. Luckily, James Meredith didn't lose his life. But what this does tell you is that violence is escalating. And if that is the case, this story is going to end with people losing their lives in order to achieve civil rights in this country.